today I'll show you how to create those cool flippable cards inside of HTML and CSS. To get started creating our cards, we're going to create a new section, and inside of the section we have our cards. So first of all, for our section, we want to use some padding at the bottom and at the top, and I can use some styles I already have right here, like padding section. And I'm going to use this style to give some padding to the top and some padding to the bottom to our section by pasting a class in here. And now we basically have this result right here. So we have some padding, but we don't have a background. So let's go and take a background, for example, by going into our style shield, and let's see, I've got this radial gradient, and I'm going to copy and paste this radial gradient into our card section, for example, container, which we are going to use in a second. So now we have this background. I'm going to use this class and give this class to our card section container, which we have right here. So now we have this gradient background. So now it's time to create our card. So first of all, we can create a div that has the class of card, for example. Inside of this card, we're going to create another div that has the class of inner. And inside of this class inner, we're going to create another div that has the class of front, which is basically the front of our card. And we have another div that has the class of back, which is the back of our card, obviously. So now inside of our front, let's say we have an H3 tag, for example, that says basic plan. So we could, for example, list the plans of a web development company. And this is the basic plan. And we could probably say the same on the back of the card, but you could obviously change that according to your needs. And now we also have a paragraph that has, for example, like 10 words. And we're going to use the same paragraph for the back of our site, but maybe we say back of basic plan, so we see a difference. And now once we go into our section, we have our basic plan and we have the back of our basic plan. So this looks pretty terrible, to be honest. So I'm going to style our card container, if you want to say so, by saying .card, and I'm going to define a width of 500 pixels. And this is just a standard width that we are going to delete later on once we put our cards into a grid, but for now we keep this width to really see how it looks like. So we're going to use a background of white, and now I take this white background and I say I want to have 0.1% opacity, so it looks basically like this. And to really create this Glassmorphism effect, we are now going to use backdrop filter of blur of 10 pixels. And now we have this blur effect, which is really subtle, so you might not even see it, but yeah, this is how it works. Let's say our card has a border radius of 15 pixels, so we get this slight border radius. And now let's also say we want to have padding of maybe 40 pixels as well, like so. So now we have these cool paddings between our content and our card. Now we can also add a border of 1 pixel solid white to create a slight white border. And maybe we're going to change card to .front and .back, because we want to have the same look for our back and the front of our card. So now we have those cards basically. Obviously we need to hide one card when the other card is visible and vice versa. So let's go to our .inner element and define a basic style that says back face visibility of hidden. So once it basically shows the back face, we want to have it hidden, and once it shows the front face, we want to have it visible. But I think we should probably add back face visibility to our front and our back, because that makes a little bit more sense. But we're going to use this .inner class, which basically wraps our front and our back as well later on. So now let's go and say that our .back has a transform rotate property of 180 degrees, and we can say rotate Y. And as you can see, now our card is basically invisible. So the back of our card is invisible because our card is rotated by 180 degrees. Obviously, if you rotate a paper by 180 degrees, it means that you see the back of the paper. Since we have back face visibility to hidden, we can't see the back of our paper, if you want to say so, or of our card, because it's basically the back and we don't see the back. And this is how it works. And now we could, for example, say that we are going to rotate .inner once the user hovers over the card. So let's say .card:hover. So once the user hovers over the card, we are going to change something for the .inner style. And we say we want to have transform of rotate of, again, 180 degrees. And as you can see, now that we hover over the card, we have the basic plan right at the right of our screen. So it looks pretty weird, but we'll fix that just in a second. Inner has a position of relative. And now our front and our back have both a position of absolute. And it looks pretty weird, as you can see. So let's say we give position relative to our .card. And we'll also give the width to our card. Front and back take up 100% of that width, and we want to have position absolute and inset of 0, which basically means take up all of this available space. So now we're actually going to create a grid by putting our card, which is basically everything right here, inside of a class that has the class.grid, and inside of this grid we have 2 cards for now. And now this .grid class is something that we've already defined right here. So it basically just says display grid. And now we are also going to use grid auto, which basically says grid template columns repeat auto fit min max 250 pixels 1FR, which basically means that the minimum value of our card is 250 pixels of width, and otherwise it's 1FR. So it basically takes up the available space. So once the card would be smaller than 250 pixels, our items are basically going to wrap into the next line. And auto fit, yeah, just means take as many columns as you need. So let's go right here. We've copied that class, and instead of our grid template, we are also, going to add grid auto like so. And now we basically have this grid that includes 2 cards. Now we can also remove width of 500 pixels for our card, since we don't need this. We'll take up the available space anyways. And now it basically looks like this. Once we hover over the card, we get this flip effect. So now the first mistake I've basically made is I need to use rotate Y instead of just rotate. And now we basically get this rotate effect that looks a lot better already. Obviously, we now have this random effect where it's basically mirrored the text once we have the back of our card. So we're going to go into .inner, which is the container that contains our front and our back right here. So inner contains front and back. And inside of this inner class, we use transform style, and we say preserve 3D, which keeps the 3D transformation into account. Now we can also say that once we go into our .inner transform state, basically our hover state, let's use a transition of all of 0.5 seconds of ease, for example. And now once we hover, we basically have this cool flip effect. It would also make sense to use a perspective of 1000 pixels, which will make the effect look basically a little bit more 3D, and this is the effect that we have right now. So let's go ahead and style our card. Let's say our font right here, first of all, is white, and the same obviously goes for the paragraph right here. So now we have this effect. And now for this grid, we are going to take the entire grid. We'll delete the grid, and we'll say that we have another div, and inside of this div we have this grid, and this grid should only take up 80% of the available space. So we're basically going to say W minus 80, which says 80% of the space is available, which is a class that we will have right here. So with 80%, and let's now say that we want to have class flex and justify center as classes for this wrapper div, basically to center this 80% big div in the center. And now this is what it looks like. Obviously, it would also be pretty cool to have a gap of 3, for example, gap -3, which should be 30 pixels, I think. We're going to save the document. And my mistake is that we need this gap 3 right here for our grid, basically. So now we have this gap as well, and now we have those cards, which still look pretty terrible. As you can see, our padding does not work on every single border, so we can basically delete it right here. And we're going to save the document, and now we have this effect, which is basically not what we're looking for. So what we can do is we're going to go into our card. We say that we want to have an aspect ratio for our card of maybe 1:1. So we have a square. Now we'll also add our padding again. And now we can say that this inner div should take up 100% of the height. And obviously this front and back should take up 100% of the height as well. So now this is what it looks like. Obviously this might be a little bit too big for some of you. So what we can do is set an aspect ratio of maybe 3:1. So now we have width 3, height 1. And this is how this card can basically look like. Obviously it still looks pretty terrible. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a second button, or we are going to add a button or badge, if you want to say so, overall. And we could use this badge to display the price to a user, for example. Let's say $99.99 for the first item. And let's say we give this one a class of badge and minus white. So now we have a white badge. Let's say this white badge gets some styling in here, and we probably want to have a background of white, a color of black, padding of 10 pixels top bottom and 40 pixels left right. And now we can say we want to have a border radius of 30 pixels. So now we basically have this badge. Let's also add that we want to use a max width of fit content. So now it fits our content. So now we have this badge, which also looks pretty cool. So we can also give our badge an M2 by using M-2 as class, for example. So now we should have 20 pixels of margin, maybe M1 is better, 10 pixels of margin. So now we have this badge. Now we're also going to use a color of a class of white, which will give us the color white, and we're going to do the same for our paragraph. So now we have those classes right here, and obviously you could have some more text for the basic plan, but this is nothing we really need right now. So let's just copy those elements to the back of our page, and let's say basic plan back page. And obviously you could do a lot more right here, it doesn't really matter, but as you can see, we now have this card flip effect. Obviously this card like here doesn't look too great, but once we add some more cards, this could really start to look pretty cool in my opinion. So we're going to delete this card, and we'll take the first card that we have right here, and let's just duplicate this card 4 times, for example. And once our grid starts to do its job, it should start to look really good. And obviously for these types of cards, it would make sense to go for a different aspect ratio. So what we are going to do is we say aspect ratio of 1:1, for example. So now we basically have those cards. We can flip them to the back. We can also obviously change the content if we wanted to. And now once we change the width of our elements of our page, it will adjust since it is obviously responsive, as you can see. So once the screen gets kind of small, one of the cards flips down. Once it gets smaller, 2 of the cards flip down, and once it gets even smaller, 3 of the cards start to flip down. And obviously we could also add some more text right here, because right now it looks pretty flat. So we could, for example, say, let's add some text right here, 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 and here. And now we have those cards. It would be pretty cool to maybe also have an H2 at the top, which could say our plans, and now we could also just copy our plans from the heading that I have already created at the top right here. So I'm going to just copy and paste those class names. In here, obviously, you can style this as much as you want. And I take the class right here, and this is the result now. I'm also going to add white right here. And for this div, I'm going to use mt-8, which should be 80 pixels margin. And now we have this result. And I think this modal section looks really cool. And obviously you could have different things on the front and on the back of the page, like we just have a different title, but you could obviously also change them a lot and adjust them according to your needs if you wanted to. So I added some placeholder text for those cards, but we could also maybe make our text a little bit bigger. So on the front page and on the back page, we could, for example, say that this one has a font of large, for example. Let's see how this one looks. And now I think it already looks a little bit better. And maybe we can say MT of maybe 2 right here as well. So now we also have a gap, and I think this looks a lot better already. And now we could basically just take this card and let's delete that, and let's paste 2 more cards in, or 3 more cards. So now we basically have those plans. Obviously we have the exact same text now again, so I'm going to change that again now. And as you can see, we now have our basic plan, our standard plan, our premium plan, and our pro plan. And obviously you can design those cards however you want and make them look a little bit cooler.